Okay, welcome back to part 3 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 98. Who killed or assassinated Charlie Kirk? And of course, we don't know the answer, but I'm going to follow the money and go through an update on exactly what I covered last week. And most of what I covered last week ended up happening. And I'll try and dig into what I think is important for you to know and what's not important for you to know and understand so that you can see ahead. And I'd also like to tie it together with the second operation that I think is happening simultaneously and how I think they are tied together. And so I'm going to answer the question of a theory, and it is a conspiracy theory. I am theorizing and analyzing on a conspiracy that is happening in real time because we won't know the truth. And so we have to speculate because you definitely can't trust what the FBI is selling you right now. And so I'm going to answer the question of why would Israel assassinate Charlie Kirk if they did, and how to actually interpret that differently to how everyone else is interpreting that. And so if you're a long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that way before the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I talked about the US operation, which I call divorce and blame shift. And because Israel is a node that represents the military industrial complex, part of the US proof of weapons network, and Trump is a representative of the financial industrial complex, there's a bit of a power struggle and portfolio management going on, and a multi-decade operation to switch narratives so that aligning with Israel becomes very unpopular so that you can turn it into a toxic asset, but at the same time, blame shift and reset people's narratives from the very, very top. And so I believe that there is an operation to make people believe that US is so ethical and the proof of weapons network is completely blackmailed and controlled by Israel. And it's not that any of these leaders would engage in pedophilia, it's because that pesky Epstein had to blackmail them. Forget the fact that they found themselves in a position where they're blackmailed because they did the deed. We're led to believe that it was all accidentally done because these very ethical people needed to be paid off because they would never normally do this. Not that they are actually prostitutes for their own cannibalization, and that you need to be distracted with believing that it's about the left and the right, when Israel is a US colony. And yes, your government is that evil. And to think that this is only something that Israel would do, as we are seeing it in its sheer brutality, we're learning that our governments have been doing this all along. And that is causing a lot of cognitive dissonance in the mind of a lot of people. And so in order to facilitate that shift, Operation Divorce and Blame Shift is happening because the world order has reset. And I've talked a lot about it. I'm not going to go too deep into everything. But I believe that this Operation Divorce and Blame Shift is in full swing right now. And I think what we're witnessing is two operations. And I speculate and theorize that part of this conspiracy around Charlie Kirk might be involved. Now, you need to decide. And the reason I'm going to tell you that is that even if it's not true, because it is a theory, but even if it's not true, it's still being weaponized in the same way as if it were true. Okay. So my speculation, as I said, is that the military industrial complex via the US deep state was the organizer. And I think they did that because Charlie Kirk dead was as useful an asset to them as Charlie Kirk was when he was alive. And if you think that the deep state won't do that, which is a subset of the military, then you haven't learned how your country really works yet. So Operation 1, I believe and theorize that Charlie Kirk was assassination wasn't just some crazy mentally ill person. I think that it was organized. And I'm happy to be wrong. And as soon as the evidence comes through that I am wrong, I'm not addicted to this narrative because they'll use it anyway. As I said, and I covered previously, this is a useful tool that they will use, even if it was organized by them or not. And Operation 2, which consisted of Strike Qatar, and when I was giving live commentary, when it was happening in real time, people were panicking, saying this is World War III. And I was saying, no, I think Qatar knew. And I think the whole region knew. And I think we're going to get a bunch of theater as a result after that. And the end result is that America is going to look increasingly isolated because it didn't fulfill its security agreement. And Israel is going to look like a pariah state that is going to be increasingly weakened as new relationships get formed that kind of change the structure and the utility of Israel to the military-industrial complex. And then Trump representing the financial industrial complex and Netanyahu representing the military industrial complex, we're going to start to see different types of operations to make that clear. And I'm going to go through the nuanced detail and how I interpret it by following the money and the wider geopolitical trends. As I said, could be wrong. I don't think I am. But the first thing I'm going to do is I had a tweet on X, or a post we call it now, that demonstrates exactly what I said last week. That this will be used like a damn Jerry Springer show that gets lots of traffic all around. And all sorts of narratives will be put out there. And this will become like a TV show. So I tested that out. I put out a list of things that could connect this operation to why it might be an Israel operation. And I got over 6 million views across 2 posts, one with a video and one with a list of things that could connect it to Israel. And that really demonstrates exactly what I was saying last week, that everyone can pick their narrative. And I do happen to believe that this is the correct narrative, but most people don't understand the full operation because they'll use this just to say it was Israel without the context of who does Israel work for and who's on top of that chain. So with that in mind, I wanted to create a quick AI summary of the tweets that I put out and combine it with the proof of weapons network summary and my analysis. And we're going to play the final AI summary, and I'm going to go through the different parts and components that were there, draw a theory on what the assassination of Charlie Kirk, why it happened, and then we'll go through Operation 2 and all the events that happened this week that back up the narrative that I think Qatar knew, and we have actually hit a new stage in where Israel goes next. So Azad, if you could play the AI summary of the Charlie Kirk operation.
I gotta be careful the way I say this. They're gonna try to ethnically cleanse Gaza. I mean, I don't use that term lightly, okay? They're talking about basically removing 2.5 million people from there, okay? And honestly, they have a mandate to go seek justice and revenge. They do. This idea that they need to have a truce or a peace treaty, that's morally, after you see women and children be burned alive and dragged to the streets.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something huge, Simon Dixon's X-Post from September 14th, 2025. It went incredibly viral, millions of views, and it's about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But it's not just about who pulled the trigger. Dixon dives much deeper.
Much deeper, yeah. Our goal here is to really unpack Dixon's whole thesis for you.
Yeah.
We're looking at 3 main things he draws on. There's the list of connections from Jackson Hinkle, then Kirk's own words, specifically about Gaza right before his death, and finally, Dixon's own quite sprawling geopolitical theory connecting it all. He calls it the proof of weapons network.
Okay, let's get into that. Before we even talk motive, what is this proof of weapons network Dixon keeps mentioning?
Right, so Dixon describes it as this powerful, almost shadow financial structure. It's supposedly rooted in decades of black market trafficking, think weapons, drugs. He argues it was set up post-World War II, involves elements of intelligence agencies, various mafias, and basically funds covert operations globally. It's a mechanism not tied to one country.
Got it. A mechanism. And the sources, particularly Hinkle's points that Dixon shares, they suggest Kirk somehow became a threat to this mechanism.
Exactly. The narrative laid out is that Kirk started as, well, almost groomed by pro-Israel forces, a real loyalist. But then there was a shift, a turning point.
Yeah, the sources list specific examples, right? Kirk apparently started pushing back, said Epstein was Mossad, lobbied against the Iran war, and maybe most significantly, reportedly refused a big funding offer from Netanyahu himself. He even apparently told people he feared Israel would kill him. This shift led to him letting anti-Zionist voices speak at his events, which was a huge change.
And that's where the video clip Dixon shared comes in. It's Kirk talking just before the assassination. He's explicitly saying Israel's intention was to ethnically cleanse Gaza, talking about removing 2.5 million people. For Dixon, that kind of talk, well, it crossed the line.
Made him a liability instead of an asset.
Precisely. A major liability to the established order, according to this theory.
And Dixon also highlights the immediate aftermath of the shooting. He points to things he finds highly suspicious.
Like Netanyahu tweeting condolences almost instantly.
Yeah, that. And Israeli media apparently being the first to confirm the death. Plus, this detail about a private jet near the scene, owned by a Shabbat Lubavitch donor, disabling its location data. The sources also mention Trump insiders apparently disputing the official FBI story behind the scenes.
Okay, so linking these specifics to the bigger picture. This is where Dixon introduces his main theory, Operation Blameshift.
Operation Blameshift. What's the core idea there?
The core idea, as Dixon presents it, is that the U.S. military-industrial complex, this proof-of-weapons network, is actually engineering a divorce from Israel, a controlled separation, deliberately turning Israel into what he calls a toxic asset. A pariah state, basically.
Wow, okay, a controlled divorce. After decades of close alliance, why would this network suddenly want to cut ties or at least reshape the relationship so drastically?
Well, this is where Kirk's death becomes crucial in Dixon's view. He argues Kirk dead is actually more useful to this network than Kirk alive, especially after his ideological shift. Dixon uses that phrase, once you're in the mafia, you can't leave. Kirk became unreliable, maybe even dangerous to the network's plans.
And those plans involve what?
Yeah.
Moving away from the current model?
Exactly. Dixon argues the network wants to exit the forever war model. It's less profitable now, maybe. The goal is to pivot to the rebuild phase, which Dixon thinks will be managed by groups like the GCC. To do that, old structures, old alliances like the one with Israel need to be dismantled or reshaped.
Yeah.
And blaming Kirk's assassination on elements linked to Israel helps fuel the narrative needed for this blame shift.
So Dixon then points to events happening right after the assassination as proof.
Yes, he sees a pattern. Actions that seem contradictory on the surface but fit the blame shift narrative, like blocking the release of Epstein files, maybe protecting certain network assets. Then Congress banning the Pentagon from boycotting Israel seems pro-Israel, right? But then Senator Rubio pushing to revoke passports of Israel critics, while simultaneously approving over $650 million for missile defense for Israel. Dixon's interpretation is, they're publicly performing support for Israel while also building tools to crack down on dissent and manufacturing public rage against Israel through events like the Kirk assassination.
So it's like stirring the pot, creating chaos.
Stirring the pot, exactly. Fueling civil unrest, maybe, which then justifies a more intense surveillance state, a kind of technocracy, bypassing constitutional norms. It's all part of managing this messy divorce, according to him.
So wrapping this up for you, the listener, what's the main takeaway from Dixon's analysis?
I think it's his conviction that we'll never get the definitive truth, the categoric fact, as he puts it, of who killed Charlie Kirk. He believes it's destined to be perpetually debated, speculated upon, just like JFK. The ambiguity serves the purpose. Narrative control is the real goal.
Right. And this leads to a fundamental question Dixon poses.
Yeah, he asks, do you focus on the person who pulled the trigger? Or do you look higher up, who paid for it, who benefits, who understands the bigger conspiracy? For Dixon, the answer is clear. The proof of weapons network is playing the whole game. The actual assassin is almost irrelevant in the grand scheme.
So the final thought we want to leave you with, based on this deep dive into Dixon's theory, if this Operation Blameshift is real, if the goal is to manage a strategic divorce by making Israel a toxic asset, what should you be looking for in the coming months? What events, maybe legislative moves, shifts in aid, or even diplomatic incidents could be interpreted as the next step in that process? Something to watch for.
Okay. All right. So what happened since last week? Well, we have been treated to a merry-go-round of distractions with FBI releases that are completely inconsistent. We've had all sorts of fights between the radical left and the far right and racism and all sorts of every type of ideology and divide and conquer that I've been warning you about. You can pick your favorite influencer, which has been propelled into superstardom with more traffic than traditional media as a result of all kind of coming from the same Daily Wire type of network. And it's interesting that they all seem to have common stories, all these influencers, and they all seem to fill a different purpose. If you want the communist route, then you got Jackson Hinkle. If you've got the racial route, if you've got the far right in different flavors, you've got Candace Owen, you got Nick Fuentes, if you want to go a little bit deeper down there. Then you've got the Christian route, and it was Tucker Carlson. And then you've got all of these different things with all sorts of different nuggets. And they're all being fueled by a group of people that all know each other and all seem to have worked together at different phases. Whether it's even Tucker Carlson, when he interviewed Putin said that, Tucker Carlson, I know you were applying for work at the CIA. And Candace Owen, who seemed to have all come from this Daily Wire Mossad operation. And maybe it's Alex Jones that seemed to have his massive multi-billion-dollar case go away when he came along. And remember Joe Rogan that was canceled and then came back after he bowed down to Spotify's agenda. Maybe it's Nick Fuentes, who also came from the same type of turning point crowd. And all of a sudden we see Bill Ackman come along. And he seems to be connected to all of these different networks. What about Ben Shapiro? Oh, right. That's another Daily Wire connection. And what about Turning Point USA and the wife and all of these different things and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera? You are given a complete merry-go-round of distraction of every type of different narrative to get you engaged into this TV show that at the end is weaponizing assassination as a tool. And that tool is to build your social credit score and to build your profile. So I had that tweet that had over 6 million views where I basically said how people could connect it to Israel. And the prevailing narrative right now is that whereas a few years back, if you said anything about Israel, you would be called an anti-Semitic, you would be called all sorts of stuff. They're ratcheting up the other side because I believe that the media is pushing out the divorce narrative. And so they want Americans to hate Israel because America wants to say, that wasn't us. When America and Israel were one, and Israel worked for the US military-industrial complex, but now they want this plausible deniability and blame shift as well. And that's not me saying that Israel and what the crimes against humanity that have been committed there. It's just about understanding what's the top of the chain so that you can understand that you're still under the same system even once you get your divorce. And even though you might think that you have made that separation, if it does happen, they will allow these narratives to prevail in order to do an element of mind control here. So what I want to do is I'm just going to give you the list that I put out there, and maybe this will be too exhausting, of different things that connect this to Charlie Kirk being assassinated by Mossad, and then I'll give the fact that Mossad is the CIA. And then you got to ask, who do they work for? And I've said it's the military-industrial complex in the end. So the money all comes back up the chain of propping up the debt-based Ponzi scheme in the end. And it's a feeder when you follow the money. So let's go through some of these narratives, and I'm going to go through them. I'm not even going to describe them, but I'll go through some of the things on my tweet. And if I get too exhausted, then I'll just leave you to watch the tweet on its own, the post. So Charlie Kirk was groomed by Israel as a teenager. So essentially, the whole time he was paid and became a millionaire because of the money he took from Israel. He believed in Zionism. He was an evangelical Christian, and he believed in the brainwashing that Israel wasn't a prophet, and in fact, it was a land, and that you can't criticize the government. And if you do criticize the government, then you're not being good to your Christian faith. He was basically Israel's top non-Jewish loyalist, a tool for pushing evangelical Christianity, which was essentially the Schofield Bible, which is why you have so many evangelical Christians, mainly in America, because it served a goal for the military-industrial complex. So it weaponized the Jewish faith in order to get an army in Israel. It radicalized the Christians through evangelical Christianity by making an extreme interpretation of the Bible. And then it created the fake war on terror, which was a military operation in order to turn the world against Muslims so that you could weaponize all three. And Charlie Kirk was a product of that. He may not have known who he was working for. It may have been completely aligned with his ideology. But as I said, I can neither mourn nor celebrate Charlie Kirk's death, because the Zionist ideology led to the death of hundreds of thousands. And it still is today. And many people aren't mourning them because they believe in this ideology. And he got paid to push that. He financially benefited from that. And when he pushed back, for whatever reason, he got taken out. And so I cannot bring myself to celebrate nor mourn that, because that is the result of that ideology. So let's take a bit of a list. So basically, he starts mildly criticizing Israel through the whole 2 years. He was doing the whole Hezbollah narrative of exactly what you're meant to say. Suddenly, he started really pushing back on Epstein. So he started saying that Epstein was a Mossad agent. Now, you weren't meant to say that before. He then said that there shouldn't be an Iran war on behalf of Israel. So now you get this slow shift of the narrative that he's meant to say as somebody that gets paid from Israel. He then apparently, allegedly, lobbied Trump against the Iran war. Now, how do we know this stuff? Because there was public footage about that. And we're meant to believe from Candace Owen of all the evidence and the text messages and all the various stuff that's being put out there. And so basically, Trump allegedly barked back at him over the Iran side. He said Israel had full control of Trump. He referred to Netanyahu as a bully after, all of this happened in the last few weeks prior to his assassination. He feared that Israel would kill him, allegedly. We're given all of these different things that are put out there. Harrison Smith basically posts about Kirk's fear about it. So we got these different types of influencers that are sharing this different types of information that had relationships with him. Netanyahu requests Charlie go and visit Israel and do the tour that Elon Musk did when he changed his narrative. Netanyahu then apparently offers TPUSA a huge funding. We're told that it's 150 million, and we're told that it was done via Bill Ackman as well. He refused Netanyahu's funding offer, we're told. He basically became completely disgusted with Netanyahu. He basically let anti-Zionist people speak at his last event on Turning Point USA, and this created a massive amount of controversy at the time. Zionist media started attacking him and turning against him. He then went on other people's podcasts and started talking about how he felt that speaking out against the government of Israel is not the same thing. Then suddenly a bunch of Zionist donors allegedly threatened to defund Turning Point USA, which was all sponsored by Zionists as the vast majority of the funding. Then Zionist funders allegedly demanded Kirk ban Tucker Carlson from speaking at his event because Tucker Carlson was speaking out, don't go to war with Iran. And if you haven't watched my live commentary of the play-by-play, where I said the 12-day war was engineered and I believe coordinated in order to reset, everyone was thinking we're going to World War III. I was saying I believe that this was an agreed transition by all regional players. You can go back to my video, a play-by-play on the Israel-Iran war and the 12-day war. Donors basically cut him off and launched attacks, and there was lots of the Zionist influencer Laura Loomer basically came out and said that Kirk is backstabbing Trump and he's a traitor. The FBI director, who was a Zionist or a proud Zionist, basically fires the chief of the Utah FBI, and this event happened in Utah. Apparently, he has an anti-Israel interview with Ben Shapiro, where he asked very tricky questions. Ben Shapiro, the Zionist from the Daily Wire. Then Shapiro comes back and starts attacking Charlie Kirk on the Mark Levin show. So we're seeing this whole connected network of influencers that are pushing out these competing narratives. So these are the new celebrities where we are meant to idol worship all of the different things that they're bringing to us as they expose the FBI, as FBI pushes out all these narratives that are completely ridiculous. Then suddenly he has allegedly, Kirk has a combative meeting with an Israeli rabbi. And then right before the 10th of September, which was one day before the 11th of September, all these unusual people, allegedly the shooter, had all these visitors as well. The visitors had basically state license plates, so these were allegedly feds. The visitors did not give off basically a good vibe, and it's meant to be threatening, was a different narrative. Charlie Kirk was then shot in jugular from 200 yards away, and we're led to believe that being shot in the neck is different. And so now everyone's speculating, was it 450 meters away? Was it from the right? Was it from the front? Was it from the back? And suddenly everybody is now distracted doing the FBI's investigations publicly on all of these different shows. And suddenly the FBI starts leading different red herrings. And we're told that here's a complete account in very FBI language of the shooter admitting to absolutely everything at every point. And then we get these different photos from different CCTVs taking us down all of these merry-go-rounds of distractions. An undefined man basically runs in the crowd with a pistol, and then suddenly they get arrested, and then they're connected to various different rabbit holes, and apparently they have a Zionist connection as well. Then the police arrest a so-called patsy, the wrong person. Everybody's focusing on there, looking over there, and they were claiming to be the shooter. So now it's multiple people involved. The patsy basically yelled out, "Shoot me," during the arrest. So everybody was focused over there. Now, a bunch of 9/11 propaganda video surfaces of the patsy, and apparently he was a witness to 9/11, connecting it to previous operations where we haven't had the files released yet. The actual shooter then flees without any type of trace. And then later we get video footage without the gun, with the gun, and then we're speculating on what happened to the gun. Netanyahu immediately tweets within minutes of it that Israel media. Let me take some water. Israel media was essentially the first to confirm that Charles's death. So that then links it to Israel having inside and premeditated information. Private jet takes off about 12 minutes away. And this private jet is basically disables the location monitoring. So that's a professional operation. We're told then the jet is owned by Chabad Labovich, which is a big Zionist donor. Netanyahu posts about Charlie Kirk's Israel trip. And so, he was meant to be doing a trip. He talks about all this. Netanyahu weaponizes it for why you should bless Israel and all the different narratives needed. The FBI then says that foreign intel are assisting in the investigation. FBI then claims they have photos of the shooter. The FBI then claims the shooter wore tactical gear. They also confirmed that an assembled gun was found in the woods area now. There was no photo that exists of the shooter with the gun. And then we get all of these different conflicting narratives. Then different photos emerge of him, during waiting for the shooting as if he wasn't panicked. No photo existed of the shooter in tactical gear, despite the fact that FBI said that. Zionists then go on social media blitz about Kirk, all saying how Kirk was a Zionist, Kirk loves Israel, all this different narrative. Netanyahu goes on a complete media blitz about Kirk, all around all the different places, saying how he loved Kirk and then saying how ridiculous it is, and that say anyone investigating this is tying it to the Holocaust narrative and all the usual different types of things in order to say, don't talk about this. And what did he do? Islamists, of course, Netanyahu said it was the Islamists that were behind the shooting, trying to push those different types of narratives. Netanyahu said that Israel didn't kill Kirk, and he's been saying that repeatedly and going on 5 different shows and 5 different TV shows. Netanyahu then reads out a pro-Israel letter, but refused to publish the letter. And then Candace Owen then comes on the blitz saying that the letter was faked. And then Candace Owen also caused on Netanyahu to publish a letter that was never actually published. And then Tucker Carlson came out and says that basically Charlie was at war with Israel now, even though he was pro-Israel his whole career. So apparently he's leaving the mafia. And so we have everything there. Kernovich basically said that Nick was at war with Charlie Kirk was at war with his donors. So we get different confirmations. And then Max Blumenthal from the Grain Zone says that my sources dropped lots of different articles with Trump, basically being, and lots of different insider sources. And then an insider confirms that Kirk's war with Israel was confirmed. And an insider confirms that Trump was fearful of Israel. So we get this different narrative that Trump is fearful, being blackmailed. Now, nothing to do with the Proof of Weapons network. Insider then confirms that Mossad has been spying on Trump. And then Trump basically, via Max Blumenthal's and the insider, didn't buy the official FBI story, that the FBI story is fake. And it's so fake. There was no timestamps. It literally confirmed everything one would need. It had language that sounded like, rather than saying car, vehicle, and various other things. Candace Owen did a breakdown of that. Trump insiders say that outside forces killed Kirk. We get those confirmation from, we don't know who the sources are. But basically, we're told and we're led to believe, as per the FBI story, that is a radical left, liberal kid. And Trump comes out and confirms that as well and blames everything on the radical left. So that was the tweet that I put out of all these different things. And so my analysis, again, it's an analysis. a theory around a conspiracy that I believe we will never get the correct confirmation. But based upon what I believe is happening right now, my theory is that this was an operation. And if it wasn't an operation, it was weaponized as an operation, even if this was just as a result of making people mentally ill because the lack of truth, as everybody finds out that everything they have been told is a complete lie. And so we're seeing that across the whole collective West. But I believe that this was a geopolitical tool that was used by the proof of weapons network, if not, to mark a turning point, pardon the pun. And crazily, you can create a conspiracy theory around me, because a week before the operation, my blog on simondixon.com talked about how the Shanghai Proof of Weapons Network marked a turning point in America. And that blog is still there. And Turning Point is the company. So people start to connect all of these different things. But remember what I've always shared. I've been talking about the longer term trend that is happening here. That because Middle East is changing drastically, the Proof of Weapons Network does not have the same utility for Israel that it once did. And Israel is essentially a liability over an asset. And October the 7th, if you watch Atrocity Inc., was filled with absolute criticism, complete conflicting information over what you were told. Atrocity propaganda was used to make you feel a certain way, to justify what was done next. You can go to simondixon.com and watch a documentary, Atrocity Inc., that lays out all the lies and exactly who said the lies and how they don't match up with the evidence. And so October the 7th was a way of resetting the regional order. And this was because China and had worked on a normalization relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia that historically was utilized via fueling Israel in order to ensure that the Middle East could never unify around their resources. And now, because there are competing world orders, everything is changing. And so therefore, I've always said that peace in the Middle East is possible when three conditions are met. And I've covered this repeatedly over the years. Condition one is that Saudi Arabia and Iran normalize and stop being useful idiots for the military-industrial complex, which is requiring a proxy war with Israel to continue that. The second condition is there is an actual real resolution to the Palestinian cause that does not involve ethnic cleansing or genocide, and therefore there needs to be a solution based upon the power dynamics and vassalization dynamics of regional powers rather than external forces, which is what Israel proxy military-industrial complex for US is. And the third condition is that the US exits from the region as sponsoring the military-industrial complex forever war model, and instead negotiates with the regional powers. And that normally looks like replacing military profits and forever wars with deals and financial industrial complex types of deals instead. And I've always believed that that's what happened on October the 7th, that there were regional players that knew what was going to happen. Netanyahu was set a game by the military industrial complex to level the playing field. And if he could expel the Palestinians by using America's IMF leverage to get Egypt to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, then he had a set time to achieve that mission and determine his utility to the military profits. Because Egypt started pushing back by aligning with the GCC, backed by BRICS, China, and Russia, that operation didn't work, and Egypt held the fort and didn't allow for the ethnic cleansing to happen. And therefore, Netanyahu did not fulfill his mission, and his utility got worse and worse and worse. And therefore, there was this internal struggle between military profits for the dollar and financial profits by allowing a competing regional force to rise based upon a reset of order. And I think that that is what we have been witnessing. And so Israel was to do its usual land expansion for negotiation and leverage over the GCC, but eventually the military will stop funding it, stop making profits, and it will be vassalized into the region based upon control by the GCC and regional powers as opposed to US. And so I believe that all these three are happening as we speak. And that is because China normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And we're starting to see lots and lots of demonstrations of that, which leads me into Operation 2 that I'll be covering as well. So I believe what we are witnessing is that Israel is being turned into a toxic asset. And therefore, it will be purchased, acquired, invested by the GCC and the regional players as external players boycott, divest, and sanction. But the regional players invest in order to take control. And that's the only plausible way of managing this, what I call divorce and blame shift. And then slowly, America tells the truth about what Israel is, which turns it into a pariah state. And then slowly the radicals start to exit because it is transitioned into this type of thing. So in my opinion, and again, my opinion, I can't prove this, but I can follow the money and speculate on this theory. And it doesn't really matter because directionally it's going here anyway, whether this was an operation or not. But in my opinion, the US dollar's proof of weapons network is running a controlled divorce from Israel, and it is being manufactured for its US audience, and it is using narratives to influencers in order to say things that could never have been said before and would have been shut down immediately, as was previously at different points. And so there is a reason why we're able to see this message now that we weren't able to see before. And I believe there is an internal struggle, because I've always talked about the proof of weapons network has an internal struggle. It has the financial industrial complex that I think Trump represents, and the military industrial complex that I believe Netanyahu represents. Military want to squeeze all profits, and finance have to demonstrate that it will get 10 times more profits through peace than through the forever war model. And this requires Israel changing what it is and actually becoming a state rather than a useful tool for a money laundering operation to siphon back profits to America. And that's why we're getting this change in narrative and this truthfulness that we've never had before. But not the full truth, just enough to manage a divorce, and you maintain that you think your country wouldn't do this, but it would only do this because it was blackmailed, AIPAC controlled, and various other things. Because they don't want you to point fingers at what actually controls, which is what I've been trying to describe, the proof of weapons network. And if you watch my, if you looked at my blog, "Do Jews Rule the World?" I explained that no, it is a power dynamic, and Jewish power is one faction of power, but it's not rule the world and force people to do stuff. It is a faction of power, and that power dynamically changes based upon who controls shares. And so you can go through all the different conspiracies, and I break down by following the money how that is a narrative that is utilized because there's elements of truth, but it's not the complete truth. So I believe the proof of weapons network is currently managing rage and manufacturing rage. And there is a narrative to Americans. There is a narrative to the rest of the world. And Americans are meant to hate Israel. And Israel is creating crimes against humanity. And there is a lot to hate about what is happening with that society. We've witnessed 2 years of genocide, and it's now being called by the United Nations a genocide. So since Kirk got assassinated, which was the day before 9/11, basically check what has dropped. Everything that takes away America from the pretense of having freedom of speech, First Amendment, Second Amendment. And I covered this in previous episode about manufacturing consent and you believing that the Constitution protects you. No, the Constitution protects you from the tyranny of government, but it does not protect you from corporations taking over the government and the proof of weapons network. And if you use your freedom of speech, they'll weaponize it for AI and social credit scores. And if you use your Second Amendment right, they will utilize that in order to manufacture a surveillance police state that they are currently doing right now. And so in order to make you angry, we've had the release of the Epstein files. I believe the Proof of Weapons Network controls those and the politicians don't. And so that has been blocked. And that makes people very angry, given that the CIA has always been involved in sex trafficking, human trafficking operations and crimes against humanity. And it is a real problem. So we've also heard the Pentagon has now banned boycotting of Israel, even to the point where states that boycott Israel are not able to get access to disaster support. This makes people mad. This makes people very angry. This questions freedom of speech, and it plays into the narrative that Israel controls the world when those budgets control what those politicians do. Marco Rubio also is pushing to revoke any passports of Israeli critics. That makes Americans mad. And there is a genuine competing ideology. People are on a need to know about these operations, as I speculate is happening. We also had the approval of $650 million for Israel's missile defense. So more money going across during the time of showing the information about what is happening here. Rubio himself went off to Israel while this was all happening. That pushes out photo ops. Makes people really, really angry. You look under all of those expos and you see the anger. People saying, oh, you know, our governments are controlled. So it's the perfect blame shift narrative when the time is right, when the divorce needs to happen. And this is all happening while they prep the next stage. So they're basically turning the US into the surveillance state technocracy. That was all in the big, beautiful bill. All of the Palantir integrations, all of the Department of Government Efficiency, all of the data that we've seen. We've already seen that the UK is the beta test. We're implementing all the technology. We've seen that technology was beta tested in Gaza via Palantir, in the West Bank, in integration with drones in Ukraine and various other things. You know, they're pushing Congress, Senate, and the courts keep pushing basically Israel first case law. That ties in perfectly to Israel controls the world narrative. Now, if the ethnic cleansing actually happens, I will change my belief around where this is happening. But I don't believe the end ethnic cleansing is actually going to happen. And that's because I believe the thesis that I got here is that this is a regional managed turning Israel into a toxic asset while the US releases, while Iran and Saudi normalize, and Iran are complying with that, as well as the GCC and the things that I'll be covering in Operation 2 as well. So basically, what is this? These different Israel first types of things that you can push through while there is an Israel first Senate and Congress and maybe members of the judicial that are bribed. If you can create the case law, you can then change what you utilize this case law for later. And this is a slow removal of the Constitution and what Americans hold dear, and freedom of speech and various other things. Once these are used where you can get them through based upon a corrupt Israel first ideology that was built up over decades, you can then get lots of different law changes and case law that remove the Constitution, which is ready for this fueling the civil unrest and military type of martial law and various other deployments of federal police and ICE and the privatized prison industry, and all the business models I've covered with Core Civic, GEO Group, Palantir, the other companies that are within the proof of weapons network that get paid like a dividend and revenue for the more civil unrest. So you can call me crazy, but what I'd encourage you to do is maybe check back in a year and we'll see directionally where this goes. And I'll keep covering this. So subscribe on my YouTube channel, hit the bell symbol, all, and I'll tell you if I think I'm wrong or I've got this wrong. But I don't think I have. And so the most important point is I may get some of the details wrong. You know, I didn't think that we were going to get the 12-day war between Iran and Israel. But once it happened, I was able to say that this is all agreed upon theater, and that there is agreements, and I'll go through that in the second operation. And I believe the same was the case with the Israel striking of Qatar. And I covered it in real time as it happened, said what I think will happen next, and then I'll analyze what happened next, and we can see how wrong or right I was. But the point is, directionally, it seems to me that we're going in that direction. So it doesn't really matter whether they did it or not, it's how they use it. And I think they're using it for this right now. And I think people need to be cognitive. And of course, many people are falling for it's the radical left, it's the far right, it's the Muslims, it's the Jews, all that different stuff, and all the operations that I've told you about. That you can just pick your narrative and they'll give you a cocktail. We will never know, is my prediction, the full truth. And already everything the FBI has released, you can't even trust that. So this will send you on a merry-go-round of distraction forever, and it will be utilized to gain more traffic, to solidify and iconize different votes. And the tragedy is that Charlie Kirk dead was more useful to the proof of weapons network than Charlie Kirk alive. And that's the point. So the second part I wanted to cover, and then everything that happened this week that makes me believe that this is an operation, is Operation 2. And I covered it last week, and I covered it on Spaces in real time. Follow me on X if you want to get real-time analysis. And that is that Qatar, the Qatar and the Israel strikes that happened on Qatar, which also matched the Iran strikes on Qatar. And so we had both sides, Iran and Israel, are able to strike Qatar that achieve different means. And it didn't lead to a retaliation either way. That's because I believe Qatar agreed to it. They'll never admit it, but I think it served a strategic purpose. What did it achieve? So, okay, we get Qatar striked by Israel. Immediately, you get the people that don't know how to analyze, say World War III, World War III. I gave you the reasons why Qatar is different from everyone else in the region, because America had a security deal with Qatar, and it hosts a US base, and it is a US ally that, for America, hosted the political arm of Hamas and was able to fund Hamas, and that got money in. Have these destabilization campaigns and various other things. I don't know who's at the top there, but the US, and that is an Israeli narrative. We'll never get the full truth. We can just directionally look at who benefited from this. But at the end of this, the US security deal looks unreliable in the region. So all the regional players say, can we rely upon the US? No. Can we buy their weapons? Yes. Do we need protection from Israel? Yes. Who else can we buy weapons from? Russia, China. So who benefits at the end of this? Israel looks weak. US doesn't look like someone you can rely upon, but you get a bunch more cells for the US proof of weapons network in a defense manner rather than a forever war manner, which means that the proof of weapons network is negotiating as much cells as they can before the financial industrial complex takes over. China's already done the negotiation and the normalization, but Trump eventually will get his Abraham Accords, and he'll eventually get his Gaza plan, which I covered, but it will be a different version. But who's on top of the chain? It's the GCC and it's the Proof of Weapons Network. They are replacing military profits with financial diplomacy and negotiations. So in response, what did we get immediately after after Israel was struck by Qatar? Well, we had Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, 2 members of the GCC, officially banned all Israel passport holders from entering into their country. So there is a form of sanction over Israel. There was warnings of immediate arrests if they get found. So you can arrest any Israeli in the country, weakening Israel. Qatar planned basically that they were going to start purchasing some of the Russian S-400s, defend its sovereignty, and basically these allow you to shoot down Israeli jets and missiles. I'm not a military expert, but basically they hedge with Russia in order to protect Qatar. So that gives a flex to the US Proof of Weapons Network that they're willing to look at alternatives because the order has been reset. Then Egypt comes out and plans to establish, basically there were headlines around a NATO-style joint Arab force in order to defend any of the Arab nations under attack. And so that gets a lot of headlines. That gives negotiation power in negotiating with the US Proof of Weapons Network. So what is actually happening here? My speculation is that just as Qatar knew about the Iran strikes and that they were pre-agreed, and the end result was to give Israel the narrative it needs that is taking on Iran, America the narrative that it took out the nuclear threat, and Iran the narrative that it defended itself from Israel, while the IRGC hardliners that wouldn't agree to such a normalization were taken out. And obviously the Axis has not been supported since. So we're moving towards stabilization on all fronts in a unifying way that we've never seen before, with everyone being able to maintain their narrative and their optics in the geopolitical sense, because it's the only way to make this transition without creating civil uprising because of the sheer crimes against humanity that Israel is committing via Netanyahu, via the profits of the military-industrial complex, for the profits of the financial-industrial complex, that is weaponizing genocide, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity, as it always had. But we're now seeing it on video. So when the Iran strike happened, when Israel struck Iran, this was basically when the prevailing narrative was that the GCC appeared to be friends with Israel. And it was the prevailing narrative was they're all sellouts, they're all Zionists, they all support Israel, and they're basically enemies with Iran, and Saudi and Iran are the enemies, which they historically have been prior to the normalization. And it doesn't mean they like each other. It means that there is an opportunity for the region to expel the colonizers. And what was the point of resistance in the first place? It was to expel the colonizers and resist. So eventually you get to a point where goal is achieved. And why is goal achieved? Because there was a rising power, China, that aligned with BRICS, and BRICS aligned with the GCC. And now you're able to get this change. And October the 7th happened in order to reset the board and determine the next order at the same time as tariffs, at the same time as Trump, resetting America into a regional power. So I believe Qatar knew about the Israel strikes, and it was all prearranged. And basically, it was allowed to, the truth is allowed to come out and manifest itself about Israel at the same time when everyone helps Israel. And this helps push Israel into being a pariah state. And this is at a time when they need to flip the narrative, flip the chessboard. What do you need to flip the chessboard to? That GCC is an enemy of Israel. and the GCC has normalized with Iran. So now you need to flip it exactly on the opposite side of what happened during the Iran strikes on Qatar. So I believe that this was all organized by China, as I said. So the question comes is, why would Netanyahu, allow for this to happen? Why would they order the strike knowing that it may lead to a reset and diplomatic ties happening all around the region and with the US proof of weapons network, but without Israel? Because my answer is, and this is what I argue with people on Spaces all the time, Netanyahu does not rule the world. He is controlled by the military-industrial complex and the proof of weapons network. And so because he is working with the proof of weapons network and does not work for Israel, his job is also to destroy Israel and get away with it, where he doesn't end up in prison and his cases go away. And so all of these different types of operations, I would say, is the proof of weapons network resetting the world order. Now, people will say that's crazy, that's 4D chess, but let's follow the money. Let's look at why this is happening. And I believe this is a managed transition. And this is why I continue to believe, unless I'll change my mind, if the Palestinians get ethnically cleansed and it's allowed to happen because Egypt bow down to the IMF and they do what they're meant to do, rather than pushing back because of its new backing. So I personally believe that Israel is being vassalized into the GCC, and GCC is negotiating with the US proof of weapon network, and they are also hedging with a path of the European Union in case Trump goes rogue and no longer represents the plan of the financial industrial complex, and somehow this goes into a power struggle between the tops of the people that were sat around in the White House at the technical industrial complex and also were invited to Buckingham Palace in the UK, as I covered in part 2. So what did we get after that kind of backs up whether this narrative is the case? So the Ministry of Defense, His Royal Highness Prince Khalid bin Salman bin Abdulaziz, sorry if I get that completely wrong. But anyway, the Minister of Defense, he met with he met in Riyadh with Ali Lanijani, which is the Secretary General at the Iranian Supreme National Secretary Council. So they had a photo op immediately between Saudi Arabia and Iran, pushing normalization, that this is bringing us closer together. Anything that brings Saudi Arabia and Iran closer together is the opposite of what Israel wants if Israel ruled the world and Israel was in charge. And so during the meeting, and these things only happen when you want optics for it to achieve. So during the meeting, they basically reviewed all of the Saudi-Iranian relations that started from the normalization that China brokered between Iran and Saudi Arabia. They also discussed the regional developments and in an effort to achieve different types of security and stability in the region. Okay, so I think that says that they wanted optics that Iran and Saudi are good, and Qatar and the region are starting to negotiate deals with the US proof of weapons network, but the US security agreement is not good, and it is bypassing Israel, and therefore Israel is no longer a utility to US. What about the European side? Europe is vassalized by the proof of weapons network, as we covered. But the Spanish government now formally basically came out and said that nearly $700 million, a deal that was going to happen to acquire 12 Israeli-designed high-mobility rocket launchers, is cancelled. So in Europe, they're doing the sanctioning, divestment, and boycotting. Everybody else is doing the boycott because they hate Israel. That is making their economy a toxic asset. The stock market's still doing well because it's a part of the US proof of weapons network. So the military industrial complex is still rolling, but that's controlled by BlackRock and the financial industrial complex, while the economy gets wrecked and things are going more and more into civil unrest with the economy and Israeli society. Then at the same time, remember we covered the Egypt deal that they were going to get $35 billion, which would control a choke point of inflows of natural gas into Israel, and therefore it would become a dependent upon Egypt. So the neighbors are controlling the assets, which is the process of vassalization. That is the technique of the IMF and the economic hitmen, control through controlling routes and investment. Meanwhile, in Spain, they're doing the weakening of the economy. So Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, he announced that that basically they're going to coordinate a ban on weapon sales with Israel. So there's going to be no weapon sales. They're doing the sanctioning as well. He called for Israel to be barred from any type of international sports. So this is weakening the brand of Israel, turning it into a pariah state. Even the European Union basically suspended financial support to Israel. So it's only America left. America isolated the rest of the world against Israel, and Israel a pariah state. That's how you set up the perfect M&A type of transaction for a predatory deal by the financial industrial complex. So what did Netanyahu came out as well? Now, maybe this is what makes me think we're nearing the end of the absolute crimes against humanity. And please, could not be soon enough. I don't want to do this analysis anymore, but because there are still crimes against humanity, atrocities, death, destruction, starvation, famine. Like, the reality of the situation is horrific. And now it's being admitted, even though we knew all along and we were reporting all along. So Netanyahu came out and said to his people, Israel faces, this was in Hebrew, so whenever he speaks in English, it's designed for our consumption. When it's in Hebrew, it's designed for his audience. And so Israel faces growing global isolation and may be forced into an economically strangled super Sparta reality. He basically warned that due to sanctions, trade restrictions, and digital disinformation campaigns, so he needs his people to still be on board, Israel must prepare for a near autocratic economy, especially in defense industries. So the companies that are owned by the US proof of weapons network, i.e. the military industrial complex in Israel, the stocks do okay, but the economy does badly. Perfect setup. This will be, basically, this will be complete and total, yeah. Okay, so yeah, so that was a quote from Netanyahu. So it makes me think, I hope, I pray that this is coming closer to the next phase. But I did believe that the Qatar strike was the next phase. So what do I think comes next? I think this will be complete vassalization of the entire Levant region by a regional hegemon. That means multiple players control their own region, a collective sovereignty, as it were, sovereignty. Complete and total vassalization, including Israel. And what Israel essentially is today will be completely transformed. I think it will be owned. I think it will be controlled one step at a time, over time, where the policy is no longer for the US military industrial complex, which means that they need to be a normal state, which will take all of the fake Zionist cult and make them want to leave, because it will eventually, I believe, be an Arab, dominated region again. as it was before. And Jewish people that don't want to engage in ethnic cleansing and settler colonialism will leave. And that's what I think is happening in the region. All of the people that were just there for the money and the investments, they'll all go because they won't like it anymore. And I think this is the transition phase we are going to. So we got announcements as well as a result of the strike. Quote, Qatar and the US are close to finalizing a stronger defense cooperation agreement. This is the actual truth. So this is what's actually happening. But they shouldn't have said US because US is a vassal state for the Proof of Weapons Network. This is about negotiating the weapons sales into a defense environment rather than a forever war, and making sure that that the military companies get to still service this as they exit the region and make more of their profits upon Europe, Latin America, and Central America and the neighbors. Maybe escalate with Greenland and various other things. Now, we got a massive hype cycle around Qatar looking for alternatives and not working with the US and all sorts of defense treaties. And I personally believe that was brought about by that was meant to happen. Well, the result of all of that, if you think about it, is you do a deal with the US, but Israel is no longer useful because Israel is a forever war tool. And so if Qatar goes direct to US and US looks bad, then I think you get the theatrics and the optics that are as a result of GCC negotiating with the Proof of Weapons Network, which are the real powers. Okay. We got announcements of finalization of advanced cooperation agreement. Now, we also got the United Nations. There's been a bunch of stuff at the United Nations. There was an inquiry that concluded, and the language came out for the first time, that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. That was the headline. So we get the admission for the first time, not the plausible genocide, which was determined in court. But now we get the United Nations, which will be used in the court case, that this is happening. And so we're getting this element of truthfulness that's coming out. We all know that the United Nations was a tool for US power, and US will be the last veto vote. The Europeans are switching because Saudi Arabia has built all those relationships. Qatar's been making all those investments. And the right wingers are basically deciding, whether they want to be, aligned with the financial industrial complex, or they want to continue with the military forever war. You're getting this realization. Not everyone is in on the operation as I see it. It's on a need to know basis with the right people. But this is about narrative shift and a slow shift. And this is all just a calculation. And then they test whether these things work or not. And there's nothing else to it for them. We're getting more and more criticism of Zionists that are being, they're basically having to go through their reforms and where they sit on this and where they're going to go. There is more and more narratives that are allowed to hit the mainstream and social media that would never have been allowed before, around hating Jews and all those different things. Also, equally, the hating Muslims narrative, that's being push. We get the Tommy Robinson types of operations. And we're getting those extreme factions that can create the civil unrest when they need to create it. So anyway, what is happening next? So that's everything that happened in this week. So we're going to get everybody in the world, I believe, with the exception of a few, are going to be voting for the Palestinian state at the next United Nations meeting on September the 22nd. So in order to isolate US further and make Israel a pariah state, what did Trump do? Trump sanctioned the Palestinian leadership from attending the United Nations meeting. And today in the United Nations, they voted to allow attendance virtually because Trump pushed back on the visa, or the administration jumped back on the visa. This is to satisfy the Zionist hardliners within the US but eventually the result is the same. But eventually, US becomes completely isolated. Israel becomes a toxic asset. And the US voted today in the UN Security Council resolution, or I think it was yesterday. There's been back-to-back ones that was demanding a ceasefire. It was literally, the language was, we demand a ceasefire and the immediate release of all hostages. In favor were 14 at the UN Security Council against just one. The United States completely isolated in veto voting the release of hostages and a ceasefire. So then Trump reacted by inviting Netanyahu to the White House, which is going to make Americans mad or satisfy the hardliners. You satisfy those, and then it ties into the Israel rules the world. That's going to be on September the 29th. So we're going to be gaslit, and we'll have to cover some of that and analyze that. And this is his fourth visit to the White House. At the same time, Trump's only been in power for 8 months. That's how crazy and how fast things are moving. Wow, 8 months. And everybody will continue to believe that Trump is controlled via Jeffrey Epstein. The Proof of Weapons Network probably controls those files. And they're both controlled by the Proof of Weapons Network. Israel, Netanyahu, Trump, America, UK, Starmer, European Union, Macron, Canada, and all the different parts that we cover week after week after week. At the same time this week, you got different types of conversations around the Iran nuclear deal, and that is those conversations are continuing. And so you get the back and forth until the deal is done. Then we probably get the announcement at the end of it when the time is right. And this is what I call Operation Divorce and Blameshift, and I think it will continue for a while. Eventually, we're getting the slow integration between the axes of resistance rather than resisting because we're moving to the next phase. It's no longer funded. And so you either integrate into the region or you get eliminated through cooperation by the whole region and the resetting of the power, which is what I think we've seen time and time again. Again, this is not what I'm advocating for. This is what I think is happening based upon just following the monetary flows and the general direction. After that, I believe we're going to witness the fall of the Israeli cabinet. Netanyahu probably disappears and won't be held accountable because he's been a good tool for the Proof of Weapons Network, and he's fulfilled all of his goals, and he favored the Proof of Weapons Network over Israel. I think you're going to see that. And they got all of the investments in the financial industrial complex that they needed as a result of this. And the GCC got their control, and then all the different negotiations were happening to align the interest of finance and GCC. And all of this, I believe, weakened Israel and strengthened the GCC and the Proof of Weapons Network, but from the financial perspective rather than from military forevermore. So we got a couple of additional announcements. We got an announcement from Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. They basically signed a joint strategic defense agreement. What the agreement essentially says, whoever attacks Saudi Arabia attacks Pakistan, and whoever attacks Pakistan attacks Saudi Arabia. Now, Pakistan is a nuclear force as well. So this is the first deal that Saudi has signed with a nuclear power other than US. So this moves towards this strategic independence at the same time as purchasing SIL weapons from the US Proof of Weapons Network. And then there were rumors that were put out there that Qatar and UAE may join the same defense agreement with Pakistan that Saudi Arabia signed. And Saudi Arabian Central Bank signed a deal as well to launch Alipay, which is a payment provider by 2026 working with China. So you got these different competing, slow, managed transition between the BRICS and the Proof of Weapons Network with America as a regional power, which is exactly where I think they wanted to sit at the end of this, with their own regional sovereignty, but co-investment with the finance and colonizers to buy more of their freedom rather than having Israel as this force for destruction, which is fueled by Iran and Israel being always at their throats. So that will allow for different payments within China. So that was I talked about the Shanghai Proof of Weapons Network that's being built as well. And remember, Pakistan historically was an IMF tool, but now it's got Belt and Road Initiative. So that connects into the yuan military transactions that are happening. And essentially it allows the region to have its deal with the military industrial complex and the financial industrial complex, hedge away from the West with the East. And basically following the money means that the Saudi-Pakistan defense pact, I don't think is really about building, some real type of deterrent. It will get tested. That then goes into BRICS and India and various other things. I think it's more like kind of portfolio adjusting and the proof of weapons network. There was a great post by Evan on X that went through like this different types of portfolio management, which I'll summarize a little bit as we close off as well. But basically they are spreading risk. They get to do different transactions, different types of flows. And these new negotiations basically lead to different types of portfolio management and switching the companies that they want to switch power to. And this is how the proof of weapons network. So you can flow different types of deals either in dollars, or you can do them through Western channels, or you can do them through, international financial institutions. This is kind of what I think they're negotiating in the background. But this is a big win for the financial industrial complex, which means that FIC is winning over MIC generally. Okay. And so that is everything that I think is happening this week. You've got one member of the GCC that allegedly harbors terrorists, which is the Hamas side. And then you've got another member of the GCC, which is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that is normalizing with Pakistan as an alternative route that is also doing deals with the European Union. And so you really get a double blow for Israel, because under neither direct to the proof of weapons network without Israel military industrial complex, and you get the other type of model, which is the EU, which is a double blow to Israel. So I believe that this helps the proof of weapons network revenue streams remain intact. It diversifies across different buyers and different partners, rather than fully having to rely upon just the US proof of weapons network, which creates a hedge. And the end result is that you get the weakening of Israel. And then when you get this managed transition as well. And I think it was the Qatar strike, both times by Iran and by Israel on Qatar, that was needed in order to pressure everything into this diplomacy phase that comes next. And I said, we are moving in this direction, and I know I'm wrong if we end up with the Palestinians being ethnically cleansed. And that is what I think we are witnessing in terms of the geopolitical side at the moment. So it's both a black pill, red pill, orange pill, and also a little bit of a belief that there's glimmer of hopes that we should be nearing the end. And once you get to the end of this, imagine the difference in the world when US is regional. Imagine when BRICS has more control over what's happening in Africa and the impact in the global south, and the possibility for the Middle East to actually enter into this phase of just not killing each other because of these unnatural divide and conquer interventions. It may not be exactly what we want. It's not exactly what I would advocate for. But I hope this is the direction that is actually going. And I think that's what we need to remember. So you need to protect yourself in the West. I think the POW is going to look to make up the profits, and I think it's cannibalizing itself. I'll keep covering the different types of things, and we'll keep analyzing. And this is everything I've got for the part 3 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 98. Why would Israel want to kill or assassinate Charlie Kirk? And the answer is 2 operations. And if you tuned in right at the end, go back to the beginning. And I covered the 2 different types of operations. And with that in mind, I'd like to remind you that if you enjoyed this content and you would like to continue along the journey, then please do subscribe to me on YouTube. Please do follow me on X, where I stream on both of them. Please follow me on Rumble in case I ever get taken down by the YouTube Proof of Weapons Network and the Technical Industrial Complex. And I back everything up on simondixon.com. There's lots of guides there that you can gain. I created a 5-part blog series so that you can really dive deep into these different topics, learn how to self-custody and protect yourself. This is how we resist. You can also get a free login to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, where I give you lots of resources to help yourself protect yourself. Boycott the Fed with Bitcoin. Boycott BlackRock by owning it in self-custody. Boycott the banks by not borrowing against your Bitcoin once you own it in self-custody. Boycott the global institutions of the Proof of Weapons Network by spending local wherever you can and investing in decentralization, and resist against centralization with decentralization. But always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some are going to get wrecked. Others are going to do really well. I hope we can transition by having our self-custody, which allows us to be in peace, love, and unity, and get to where we need to be in order to have the maximum impact. I'll come back next week with Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 99, and we'll break this down into different parts, and you can get it on the podcast or all the different resources. I would really appreciate it if you got me past 102,000 subscribers on YouTube. And you followed me on X so that I can get this message out to as many people as possible. And please do share it. I'll see you this time next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 99. Peace.